Near the center of modern-day Fort Bliss, Texas, stands a small frontier army post, a recreation of the fort as it was over 100 years ago. During those years, Fort Bliss has been the home of the infantrymen, the horse cavalrymen, the anti-aircraft artillerymen, and today, the air defense missile men. The simple army outpost of 100 years ago and the imposing facilities of modern Fort Bliss would seem to have little in common. Yet through the decades, the Army's basic mission in the Fort Bliss area has remained the same: defense of the United States. The Army's role in this southwest area began during the Mexican War, when Colonel Alexander Donovan led troops into the Paso del Norte, or Pass of the North. Not long afterwards, with expanding national boundaries, soldiers surveyed the first wagon road from San Antonio to what is now El Paso. Then came the wagon trains pushing westward. They had to be protected, as did lonely frontier settlements. Protection was also needed by those solitary wanderers of the West, the trappers and prospectors, as well as the isolated cattlemen. The lone stagecoach constantly faced Indian attack. Yes, for the Army, the years on the frontier before the Civil War were active ones indeed. When the Civil War began, Fort Bliss was occupied by the Confederacy. Later, in the 1870s, no troops were assigned to the border area, and the lawless element terrorized the settlers. In 1878, the troops returned to restore order. In 1914, Brigadier General John J. Pershing assumed command of Fort Bliss. Pancho Villa, the Mexican revolutionary, posed a threat to border communities. To maintain peace, more troops were needed, so state militia was called to duty, and by 1916, some 60,000 troops were at Fort Bliss. Later that year, with permission of the Mexican government, Pershing led the punitive expedition into Mexico. This expedition marked the first occasion that American troops used aircraft, a development that would mean much to Fort Bliss in the future. Came World War I, and the fort was garrisoned by the 15th Cavalry. Men were trained here for the front lines in France. Many outstanding leaders in World War I saw duty at Fort Bliss. In the period between the two great wars, the famed 1st Cavalry was stationed here. In 1940, on the eve of World War II, a new branch of the service was brought to Fort Bliss, the anti-aircraft artillery. Gun crews trained here served throughout the world. In 1945, when captured V-2 missiles were brought to this country, a brand new kind of unit was activated at Fort Bliss. The 1st Anti-Aircraft and Guided Missile Battalion, organized specifically for missile research and development. As early as 1944, the first American air defense missile had been conceived by Fort Bliss anti-aircraft artillery officers. 9 years later, in 1953, an extensive development effort paid off when the Nike Ajax air defense missile was placed in the hands of the troops. The Army Air Defense Artillery had entered the missile age. But why missiles? Here's why. With the speed of modern aircraft, conventional artillery, even using radar and computers, must be aimed at intercept points over 5 miles ahead of the oncoming target, too long a distance to be practical. Besides, evasive action by the target would make a hit next to impossible, since the projectile cannot maneuver. Guided missiles were the only answer. In a few years, Fort Bliss assumed its modern role as home of the U.S. Army Air Defense Center. Here, the Air Defense School teaches today's missilemen all the complex skills needed to defend either the 50 states or our field armies against air attack. Advanced individual training for troops assigned to the Air Defense Artillery is also provided. Among auxiliary and tenant organizations are the U.S. Army Combat Development's Command Air Defense Agency, the U.S. Army Air Defense Board, the Army Air Defense Human Research Unit, the Combat Development Command's Institute of Nuclear Studies, the Defense Language Institute, the Allied Student Battalion, the Federal Republic of Germany's Air Defense School, and several artillery groups who support training in the operation of air defense weapons. Now let's take a look at how the Air Defense Center fits into the big picture. First, protection of the North American continent against air attack is the mission of the North American Air Defense Command, a combined Canadian-American command controlling land, sea, and air forces from a combat operations center under Cheyenne Mountain near Colorado Springs, Colorado. The Army's role in this joint operation is carried out by the U.S. Army Air Defense Command. Specifically, the Army's job is to defend the skies over more than 100 key population and industrial centers of the United States. To do this, the Mobile Hawk, primarily a field weapon for defense against low-flying aircraft, can be made available to protect any location in the United States proper when necessary. Permanently on guard stands the reliable Nike Hercules, ready to defend against high-altitude threats. This is how a Nike sight would operate should an enemy threaten our country. Upon detection by the North American Air Defense Command's warning system, the enemy's number and location, direction of flight, and speed of travel are flashed to headquarters. Instantly, this information is passed on through division direction centers to Army, Navy, and Air Force Air Defense Commands. Assume that this Nike Hercules sight is in the flight path of the enemy aircraft. Alerted to the enemy's approach, the Nike Hercules search radar detects the intruders and determines their location. Target tracking radar is assigned to track the enemy and feed position information into a computer. The particular missile selected to fire is guided toward the target by a missile tracking radar, which sends steering orders to the supersonic missile. The computer produces the steering orders by continuously comparing target and missile positions. Search radar continues to scan the sky for enemy targets. Additional missiles are ready to fire immediately. To meet the second big challenge to Army Air Defense Forces, protection of the field army, Army air defense weapons will be deployed as represented on this painting. Of course, distances will be greater. Automatic artillery weapons will be placed well to the front of the battle area. They will defend air corridors where radar cannot reach due to such terrain features as narrow valleys. Farther back, Hawk units will wait for unfriendly aircraft. Still farther back, the Nike Hercules will be ready to attack any intruder getting past the forward defenses.